There's no easier way to lose the race to China, as we have with nuclear energy, for example, than the public saying, we do not want this here. This is a democratic nation and we're voting accordingly. The Trump administration's approach to AI is very much focused on accelerating the US lead. They use the term American AI dominance. And speeding up innovation and removing hurdles to innovation. The UAE and Saudi Arabia both possess massive resources. They have very strong AI ambitions and they want to take that forward. And so I think this mixture of incentives and structures means that if you gave unrestricted access to countries in the Gulf, it could be that they build out massive data centers that are bigger than what the US has domestically. And I don't think that is in the US national interest.
Hello everyone and welcome to Audio Tokens, the podcast where we try to create audio tokens for our AGI overlords. Today as a guest I have the pleasure to bring you Janet Egan, who is a researcher at the Center of New American Security, and she focuses on natural security implications of AI and compute governance in general. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
So first, just what is CNAS more generally, and why is AI an important thing for national security?
Yeah, CNAS, or at the Center for a New American Security, we're a bipartisan think tank, so we offer independent advice and analysis to inform government decision-making and public policy. We have a focus on foreign affairs and international policy and a particular focus on national security. So our work spans international relations, technology, and transatlantic relationships, the US and China relationship, and a broad swathe of issues. But my team in particular, we look at technology and national security. And within that, we have a strong focus on AI. So where our focus hones in on is where AI development and the frontier of AI systems may generate or change national security capabilities and risks. And as part of that, we look at how compute can be used as a policy to strengthen US AI leadership and support US interests worldwide.
Okay, yeah, I realize I already made my first mistake here. So CNAS, you don't say CNAS, you you
We do
spell out the
CNAS.
letters. CNAS, okay, yeah, that's good to know for the continuation of this pod. But yeah, anyway, so your team particularly focuses on AI, but like CNAS as a whole is much broader than that. Like how big part of CNAS is focused on AI now? Like, is your team a small part of it, or is it growing as AI generally grows in public awareness?
Our technology and national security program, we've been having a growing focus on AI. So we still cover issues like quantum, biosecurity and bioscience, cybersecurity, and those priorities still remain. But we're starting to ramp up additional work on AI issues and national security implications. For the past few years, we've been doing a multi-team center-wide effort on AI safety and stability, looking at national security risks that are emerging, potential national security applications of AI. And so there's a lot of work that cuts across a lot of teams looking at these issues.
And what is the, like, because I've heard people say like, oh, the natural security of implications of AI thrown around that term a lot, and then I have my worries, of course, but I think like the broader public, broadly, what specifically do we mean? What are the risks here for natural security when we talk about AI?
Yeah, and again, it depends on who you ask. I agree with that. For me, national security risks emerging from AI. There's several. There's AI capabilities that could be national security capabilities that could then be misused. There's risks that AI systems, if not carefully developed, could act in unintended ways and cause significant harm. And then I think the third one is AI as geostrategic power. So if the US cedes its AI leadership, there's potential for it to lose its comparative military and economic superiority, which has longer term impacts on the global world order.
Right. Okay, so the first one is like misuse. You create powerful AI that could be used in military, and then this could be misused by bad actors, kind of thing.
Or cyber capabilities or novel biological developments through AI that could, cause another pandemic. And so there's there's accidental use, and then there's also misuse, I think.
Right. And the second one, is that like autonomous AI takeover scenarios, or can you expand on the second point?
Yeah, I think it's a really broad range of potential risks that could emerge. What we try and do at CNES is we try and ground it in what is the actual realities of what we're seeing, as well as sort of the potential and hypothetical risks. So there's a lot of other organizations that do a lot of work sort of projecting and predicting out into the future as to like autonomous system takeovers and how worried should we be. Our work has mainly looked at near-term things that we can kind of start to crystallize into, is this something we should be worried about or not, and or what trends in the technology should we continue to monitor to make sure that we are ready and able to respond if these things look likely.
Okay, interesting. And then the third point was if AI becomes stronger in other countries and the US loses its lead, that could have, of course, national security risks. And recently, you had a paper about this where you had five objectives to guide the US AI Diffusion Act. And yeah, to start off, maybe you can explain a bit what the current state is with AI compute governance, what the current laws are, and then yeah, we will get into the objectives here that you propose in the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the final days of the Biden administration, um, they released something they called the Framework for AI Diffusion, or the Diffusion Rule. And essentially, it was trying to thread the needle of how do you let US technology proliferate overseas and be the bedrock of every country's AI tech stack, while at the same time keeping China from getting access to it and ensuring that the US keeps the majority of it at home to ensure that leadership. Now, what resulted was an incredibly convoluted rule that I spoke to some European partners who were digesting this, and even 3 months after the rules released, they still were not clear on what was required, how it worked, whether it was they were impacted. And essentially, it led to a lot of confusion and maybe a perception that the US was not as open for business as it would like to be when it came to AI. So as a result, the Trump administration has now formally rescinded that rule and said that they're developing up a new rule or strategy for AI diffusion. And we're already seeing quite significant changes here. So, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen big deals with the UAE and Saudi Arabia to enable large exports of these control chips to these countries. And we're seeing that there's much more discussion about a promote angle to the US compute agenda. And so this paper I wrote tried to look at, well, as the Trump administration looks to rework or revisit or completely redo this rule, what are the 5 things that should be kept as key objectives as they do a more simple, efficient version? And so just to touch on them briefly, the first one was maintaining a focus on AI compute as the key enabler of US AI leadership. The second was addressing chip smuggling to China, which is a key issue still. The third was preventing competitors from overtaking the US in AI while still enabling that diffusion of US technology. The fourth is stopping adversaries from training frontier models to the cloud. And the fifth was being much more proactive in promoting US tech internationally. It's helpful I can go in a bit more detail on these as well.
Yeah, we will. But first, I want to ask, like, and so the overall objective here is, so basically, before I've chatted to a bunch of like AI safety people at that are very concerned, and their ultimate objective is to like pause AI, and all the regulations that we put in place is for that purpose, basically. From what perspective do you come here? Is this to just we need to pause because this is very dangerous, or is this like it's more dangerous if China wins? Yeah, what are the like what's the goal of these objectives, basically?
I think the goal for the US should be it currently has a lead in AI, an undisputed lead in AI. AI is going to be the transformative technology of the future, and there's no signs of other countries looking to slow down. So the US should be taking active steps to ensure it is the country that leads the world in democratic AI development and that it underpins this new technology ecosystem of the future. That will enable a number of things like geostrategic and military advantage. And it will also ensure that this tech can be governed in a way that is responsible and democratic.
Right. So is that the main reason for Because why? So maybe a silly question, but like, why do we want the U.S. to win? Maybe a silly question, and I'm applying for a green card, so I shouldn't. I should be. Obviously, we want the the U.S. to win, Team America. But like from like a more holistic view, is it the spread of democratic values that is the main reason why we want the U.S. to win?
The US has been a long-term technology leader, and that has benefited the world in many ways. One, it sort of supports democratic governance and
Yeah,
supports a rules-based global order, although that is now starting to get reworked in terms of what a new order might look like. But I think it's just really important for the US to maintain its lead because I don't think anyone would like to see a world in which China is the prevailing AI superpower. We've seen clear human rights violations from China, and we've seen the way that they use surveillance technologies on their own people, including overseas. And so I think it's uh, I think it's very readily accepted, particularly in the US audience, of course, the importance of ensuring that the US maintains its lead and wins the AI race is what some people talk about.
right, right. Yeah, I think I just managed to ask my dumbest question so far on this pod, which is amazing. Great answer to the to a dumb question. Usually, dumb questions get dumb answers, but this time it got a great answer. So thank you. uh, yeah, okay. So the first one was maintain a focus on AI compute as the key enabler to AI leadership. So a bunch of things to untangle there. Like maybe the first one, like okay, focus on compute as opposed to what? Like, are there other alternatives we could have focused on? And what does focusing on anything really mean?
Yeah, really great question. So I think earlier this year, there was the DeepSeek moment, which really rattled Washington, D.C. and stock markets, which is also what rattled Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
And I think that really led to a new conversation as to wait, does compute even matter? Like, look over there, you've got a scrappy team of very talented researchers, but very limited access to compute in China who've developed up a pretty impressive capability and they've made it open source. And so everyone was asking the question, hang on, why are we spending like billions and billions of dollars in building out AI data centers filled with these chips that create this computational power if we can just do it more cheaply? And I've heard these sentiments echoed from when I was in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I've heard it echoed from Indian counterparts as well. And I think it really led to a questioning of do we even need to worry about compute and should we stop investing in this? And so in this paper, I pushed that actually AI compute is actually more important than ever. And this is because even though uh, we're getting much greater compute efficiency for uh, models, at the same time, pushing the frontier of intelligence takes even more compute. So there's these two concurrent trends happening at the same time. Like takes more computational power to get there, and then much more rapidly, you can do it much cheaper. Uh, and then so if you want to be at the lead and pushing that frontier forward, you still need these massive amounts of compute. And then the second reason that compute is like remains to be super important is that it's almost like an entire ecosystem approach. So it's not just about who can reach a single level of intelligence fastest or like do one model more cheaply. It's about how much can you deploy that model? How many users can use that model? How much can you refine and make that model better and adapt it to specific situations? And crucially, how many experiments and new ways of processing can you run on with these models that inform the next generation of model development? And so here's where we start to see this feedback loop in compute. Like the more compute you have, the more capable the models, the better you can refine them, the more experiments you can run, therefore, the better the design of the next model. And that's why I think this is a really fundamental, important part of US AI leadership. And it's one that it can maintain while China is restricted.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think not officially disclosed, obviously, but I think there were a lot of rumors that DeepSeek trained on GPT-4 to get more training data, and obviously, like if you restrict that somehow, then maybe DeepSeek would need even more compute than they used because they couldn't use what OpenAI already built. So yeah, that makes sense. And I think we've also seen like Sam recently said that he has been very surprised by the amount of like compute they need for inference. And I mean this makes sense. if you just like, yeah, DeepSeek made it really efficient when they trained it, but like if they don't have the inference compute, then they can't use it. So that does make sense. But like, are there other alternatives? Like, if could you have gone for other focuses areas for regulating the diffusion of AI? Because like compute in itself is not the prime target, right? It's the downstream effects, the AI. So are there other things you could have used, have focused on?
Yeah, people talk about this AI triad. So there's the data, there's the algorithms, and then there's the compute. And across all of these, there's human capital. And if we start to think about those, so human capital, it's pretty hard to control the flow of people and talent, unless you're China, which has already restricted some of its deep sea researchers from coming to the US. But from an open market, free nation perspective, that's kind of hard to control. Then we think about algorithms. That's a form of knowledge. And DeepSeek, again, is that really good example of knowledge can diffuse pretty quickly. Like whether it's through conversations at Bay Area parties or whether it's through like querying the OpenAI model and getting results and then sort of copying that as well through a process called distillation. These things are quite hard to contain because you can copy it into someone else's brain and then it exists elsewhere. And data as well, it's copyable, it's shareable. You can, make multiple copies of the same thing. It's very hard to constrain and contain. And that's where compute is a bit different. It's like physical. It's like these physical chips in physical racks in massive data centers requiring massive amounts of energy. You can see it. If one person has a chip, someone else doesn't hold that chip at the same time, although they can access it remotely, but it can only be used once at a time. Like you can't have multiple people using its full power at the same time. And so these traits mean, the one other thing is it's got a very narrow supply chain. So there's only very few companies and countries in the world that possess the capability in this very complex supply chain. And so once you put controls on those, you essentially control a vital part of this triad that you can then use for AI governance. Now, it's not on its own, it's not sufficient. Models still diffuse, capabilities still diffuse, but it is one of the ways that the US can start to ensure it has enough lead time on China to approach AI in a way that they can ensure it supports rather than undermines US national interests.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, especially since TSMC controls like 90% of chip production, then it's very easy to actually regulate that because it's only one player, and if you don't have to have 1,000 different ones in the air at the same time. Would there, though, be an argument for we need to do all at the same time? And I know some people have talked about, these Bay Area parties where where people share ideas they should not share with each other. Like, is there an argument for we should focus on all of them, and then so for example, maybe some people have talked about, like, I don't know, locking down the labs and putting all the employees in a bunker, like during the Manhattan Project. Do you see a case for doing stuff like that?
I think that you should have a mind to thinking about all the aspects of AI and which ones are useful from a policy perspective. I think that's really important. Like from a data perspective, you might think about how you can free up more data in a country or like make more accessible for AI if you wanted to really advance AI capabilities. But in terms of restricting another country's access, I think that the other elements of this AI, they have a lot of perverse outcomes if you try and restrict them. So if you suddenly say to all the best engineers in the world, hey, next week we're going to lock you down in a bunker and you won't see your families very much and you're going to be monitored all the time, like you're going to lose that talent. Or at least you'll get unhappy talent, which also can lead to massive insider threat problems. And this innovation ecosystem of the US has served it so well and so long because it is a collaborative ecosystem. Yes, there's specific areas where we say, hey, these are nuclear secrets, or hey, these are really sensitive things from an IP perspective, please be careful, or like you are required to be careful. But if you start to try and lock down broad swathes of industry, you start to lose some of the magic sauce, which makes the US as good as it is. And so I think at the end of the day, I think it's really important to look at these levers and how you can boost them. How can you get a better talent workforce? How can you create greater incentives for the best minds in the world to come and work in the US? But I think it's much harder to restrict Chinese access.
Right. So the next point was to restrict China smuggling ships from other countries. What is the current state of that? Like how much smuggling are there in the world at the moment, and what can be done to prevent that from happening?
So I think the really interesting thing about this question is that we don't have a single centralized point of view or clear view as to how much chip smuggling is happening. And that is because the main way people have found out about chip smuggling to date has been through investigative journalism, not through government visibility. So we'll see reports and credible reports of uh, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of chips being smuggled in individual shipments. And so, like, just off the top of my head, I can think of three. One was for like 2,400 H100s, which is a specific type of AI chip. Another was for 4,800 AI chips, and another was for 2,000 AI chips. And each of these was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're the ones we know about. And so I think a big question is that we just don't yet have visibility over where chips are in the world. Like they get exported, then we don't really understand what happens afterwards. And so I think as the Trump administration thinks about, oh, okay, we want to be more proactive, we want to diffuse more of these chips around the world, they should be there's an opportunity to be much more clever about building the capacity to know where they are. And there's a few ways to go about this. One way is to like more resourcing for the relevant enforcement area of government, which is in the Bureau of Industry and Security, to actually give them boots on the ground that they can go and inspect data centers where there are purportedly large amounts of chips and ensure that those chips are indeed where they say they are. But that's quite resource intensive. Another more tech savvy approach could be to use geolocation tracking on the chips themselves. And so have like tamper proof and robust geolocation ping based verification of where chips are. And if suddenly a lot of chips are going offline in certain areas, you know, hey, that's probably somewhere we need to inspect and be more adamant at making sure that it's happening as it's supposed to. And then I think that other element is also working more closely with allies and partners in other countries on enforcement. So Malaysia and Singapore have been sort of reported hotspots for chip smuggling to China. And that's been a lot of where the investigative journalism is focused and found a lot of evidence that this is happening. And to date, we've seen a little bit of a crackdown from Singapore. They've arrested 3 people. But in general, it doesn't seem as though these countries are always incentivized to take as much action as might be warranted to ensure that this is seen as a crime and is not happening. So I think there's a number of things that could be done differently to ensure you have greater visibility over what's actually happening and also to prevent or disincentivize more chips going to China.
Right. Yeah, I guess at the moment it's like in the interest of Singapore to be able to to be able to do this. I don't know if the smugglers pay tax though on the money they make on this, but but maybe they go more to the local restaurant and you get tax money. But but okay, but if you like put some economic sanctions on them if they don't like responsibly check for stuff like this, then I guess that equation makes much more sense to actually crack down on it, and that is in the power of the US to do. So I guess that makes sense.
Well, like the push for more proactive partnerships and upskilling and like a shared approach to sort of communicating how essential it is that those things are done correctly, even raising it to the minister level of like, this needs to be part of our
Yeah,
agreements,
yeah.
and sort of using the carrot before the stick comes into play.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So interesting with this investigative journalists. Like, do they just? I've not read about this. I've just read about smuggling is happening, but I didn't like read into how the process of this journalist. So they go there and they like try to investigate the supply chain, and then they find problems, and then okay, that's interesting. But maybe not the way to do it. Maybe a government process would be more sustainable, I guess. Um,
I think it just concerns me we don't know what we don't know.
yeah,
And we're just
yeah,
relying on some bright, smart people going in and interviewing
yeah,
smugglers.
yeah,
And that probably doesn't capture all of it.
yeah, yeah. The worst case, like how the worst case scenario, because we can like track how many, and like Nvidia knows how many chips they sell to Singapore or to Malaysia. So we kind of know what the worst case is if they have smuggled 100% of it. but probably they haven't. But like, do I have some sense of like what's the worst case here?
I think those numbers, because I know there are massive data center build-outs happening in Malaysia as well, and
Okay.
Singapore. And so
Yeah.
I don't have a good estimate that wouldn't
Hmm.
be misleading on
I
that
see.
sort of thing. But I think the one other thing I'd like to highlight is that even when smuggling happens, the export controls still matter. Like they're still creating a differential cost that makes it harder for China to get chips and slows their AI progress. So there's also the
Right.
school of thought that's like, well, if smuggling's happening, it's all too hard. Let's just give up on export controls. And I think it's really important that we don't do that because they are still having an impact even when they're imperfect.
Right. Because the
Mm.
friction of actually having to go through the smuggler, basically. Okay. Uh, okay. Interesting. So the third point is prevent competitors from overtaking the US in AI while still enabling AI diffusion. So is competitors, is that China or there are other ones that could potentially be competitors, or what do you have in mind there?
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in getting more detail and understanding in greater detail the logistics of the UAE, US AI deals that have just been happening. And that's because, so something that's starting to constrain US build out domestically of AI data centers is access to energy. And something that's constraining access to energy, this is not a new problem, but it's because there's this massive, lengthy permitting processes and regulatory reviews and judicial challenges, and things can take decades to get underway in a way that you don't have these constraints in some other countries, particularly authoritarian countries. And so, as we're facing these constraints domestically, companies are starting to look overseas to think, hey, like it's my fiduciary duty to get, best return on investment. These delays cost a lot of time and money and certainty. Um, Maybe I should be building overseas. And then the UAE and Saudi Arabia both possess like massive resources, like capital, easy access to energy, and the authoritarian cut through to remove or overcome regulatory hurdles if it's deemed to be in the national interest. And both of these two countries are quite incredibly AI focused. They have very strong AI ambitions and they want to take that forward. And so I think this mixture of incentives and structures means that if you gave unrestricted access to countries in the Gulf, it could be that they build out massive data centers that are bigger than what the US has domestically. And I don't think that is in the US national interest. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's really important that there is collaborations with these geopolitical swing states, that they get brought more closely into the US orbit, that they get given AI chips to some extent. But I think the details matter. Like is it all in one single cluster, which could lead to one massive training run, or is it all owned by the same company? I think what is heartening to me to see is that there are US hyperscalers involved, and that gives greater assurance and visibility of how the chips are used, managed, and preventing, adversaries potentially accessing it through the cloud. So I think these things really matter. So when I think about competitors, I think about, yes, China. You don't want them to catch up, but also other countries that are not democratic, whose interests might diverge from the US's one day, who have strong relationships with China. Um, I just want to make sure, I would be keen to make sure that we don't lose or cede US leadership to such countries.
Right. So the Gulf countries, I have not seen like an AI research lab from the Gulf countries. Like you said, they have strong ambition in AI. How do we know that they do?
It's in their stated national plans. It's in their billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of investment they're putting into it. The UAE in particular seem quite AGI-pilled, like they're really focused on the very frontier. Spending time in Saudi Arabia, I think they're more looking at AI applications, but both countries, both nations are seeing AI as a pathway away from dependence on oil. So as part of their national strategies. That being said, they don't have leading AI labs at this stage. And so I think that shows that it's not necessarily their ambition to go in and build the biggest model at this point. But I think you nevertheless want to ensure you've got visibility over the largest um, potential training clusters in the world and largest AI supercomputers.
Right. So their ambition would be more like we wouldn't be the ones building the algorithms and having the AI labs internally, but they have the energy so they can build big data centers, and then they can like get power over the AI labs in the US by inviting them to train in their data centers, and then they get a share of the cake. Is that kind of roughly the idea?
That's part of it. They do have one LLM, but it hasn't been seen to meet the same benchmarks as US
I
models.
see.
Um, but I think it's more just because they don't have AI labs at this moment doesn't mean that they may not come. So these two countries have like their operating model has often been to get some of the best talent in the world. They can pay them more than other countries. They have incredible lifestyles on offer, particularly in the UAE. And there could be the potential for them to build that up in due course. So I think you want to just be mindful of all possible future scenarios and ensure that uh, massive amounts of strategic resources still have strong ties to the US and some oversight from the US.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Like a parallel is that I'm a soccer fan or football fan. I can't believe I say soccer now that I moved to the US. But yeah. So and they recently like the Saudi Soccer League recently scaled up their ambitions like 100x, and they just like buy all the best players and pay them like 10 times more than they would be paid in Europe. So maybe could we have something like that, that like they just like we have unlimited money, just like throw it all at the best AI researchers, pay them 10 times more than they get in the US, and just bring them here. That could be pretty scary, because like there's a lot of soccer players that went there just because of the money, right? And like people say, oh, they ruin their careers because it's the worst league, or and they like it's bad because of its dictatorship and all of this. But like people went there anyway, and yeah, that could be scary. Like it would be expensive, but it wouldn't be that expensive to get like maybe the 2,000 of the best AI researchers from the US, like compared to what they pay some of these soccer players. So that could potentially be a future I can see in the worst case scenario. Another thing you said, so the UAE is AGI pilled. How do we know that? Is that because they focus on just training the frontier models, or what do you mean by that?
I've just seen, I've spoken to a lot of the people over there who are engaging the US government on some of these deals. And they talk about super intelligence and they talk about AGI and they
Right.
talk about how to work with the US as the AGI partner. And so, I mean, it could just be very clever messaging to an audience that they think are receptive to those terms. But I think I heard it often enough to think that maybe they have a genuine belief that this is the future and that is what they're investing in.
Right. And when they say AGI, like, do they, in the space of possible outcomes of AGI, do they also include like total AI takeover, and they are also like safety concerned, or is it more just tools for humanity and but super powerful?
I think there's a big focus on the opportunity side of
Yeah,
AI.
yeah, yeah, makes sense. Okay, okay, interesting. And so in the news recently, like Trump went to the Gulf states and had a bunch of like deals related to chips and AI with these countries. What is the most recent thing on that front?
Yeah, so they've made massive chip deals with both of the countries. And so the first one with Saudi Arabia was giving chips to one of the examples was to a company called Humane to work on AI more on the application side, I think. I think the UAE deal is yet more ambitious. So I've seen some analysis that says they should expect to get up to 2.5 million chips supported by 5 gigawatts of energy. So in a big build out. And to put it in context, the Stargate cluster, which is the US flagship one under development at the moment, is like 4.5 gigawatts and up to, I think, about 2.25 million of the latest chips. So it's already like a really large scale deal that they're looking at.
Hmm. Yeah, so this energy thing is really interesting. Like I on a previous episode, I chatted with Konstantin, who I know you know, and he said that in the projected power requirements of one single supercomputer in like 2030 would need like 9 gigawatts, which is 9 nuclear reactors or something. Is this still a problem? I mean, it sounds like a problem, but like, is this doable in the UAE and Saudi with all the oil, or will this still be a problem for them because they need to build up the infrastructure to be able to burn all of that oil? Or
I think they're also building out nuclear
okay,
at the moment. They're also building renewables as well. So they're building a broad energy mix, and they're showing an ability to do that quickly, I think. So
hmm.
it's just they can really expedite planning and permitting as needed.
Right, they don't have the same regulatory cycles that US have. Okay, interesting. So one other part of um, the downside of having these like restrictions to China and other adversaries countries is that Nvidia doesn't get the revenue, right? Is that kind of also in the mix when you try to balance this? Like one way of like free trade has been good to the US. I mean, it's maybe a controversial statement now, but free trade has been good, and like this could be a way to like further put US in the lead by allowing the US to sell more chips. And I mean, these chips are, it's not giving them away for free, right? They're super expensive. So yeah, is that part of the balance here when we talk about export controls, that you also get money from actually selling them?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think that's why it is important to have global diffusion of US technology, because then you build like the foundations on which everyone's AI is trained, and you have greater momentum with standard settings and responsible deployment and a part of that conversation with every country. But when it comes to China, I think that, and I do see NVIDIA coming out a lot to talk about this, and it's their job to maximize their revenue. Um, but at the moment, there's so much demand for AI chips that I think it's more in, or like, I'm not worried about NVIDIA's profitability in the near term. And I think that they already are going quite well with the existing market. And
Yeah,
so, in my assessment, I think that is outweighed by the strategic imperative to get the US a lead in AI
I
ahead of
see.
China.
Yeah. Poor Jensen can only put 80% margins on on his chips. But yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, the final we touched a bit about the final point there, the fifth point, to develop and promote US offerings like AI offerings to partners. So why is it important to have like a diverse set of countries in on this plan? Why can't the US just do it alone?
I think because everyone wants to have AI. There's so much promise and tremendous potential, and we're only just starting to realize some of the benefits and use cases. And so there is demand out there. I think one of the issues is that currently the US is very much focused on progressing the frontier of AI. So chasing and pushing the boundaries forward towards the next intelligence level. But what I think this also means is that there's an underinvestment in diffusing any given intelligence level across a variety of sectors and applications. Some will argue that, like, well, if you just push the level far enough, then all the effort you've done to diffuse is obsolete because the next level is so good. And I think that sort of creates the perverse incentive for people not to invest as much in diffusion and adoption. But I am quite influenced by Jeffrey Ding's work in terms of sometimes to get the geopolitical wins or the economic wins out of a technology, it is about diffusion and adoption. And we want to already be strengthening that muscle memory of like, how do we integrate this into our societies? How do we bolster understanding of how it can be used in different use cases and manage those rollouts? And I think this is particularly important for like, it can be a particularly important tool for diplomatic outreach from the US to other countries through trade. Um, so we want countries to be using US ecosystems because that means we know that they're more closely bound to democratic countries' orbits, that that gives the US more leverage over responsible management of risks if and when they materialize. And then also just creates stronger ties and partnerships and gets more business into the US market. So I think of things like AI for government services or AI in pharmaceuticals, optimization and logistics supply chains. And there's just so many everyday use cases for businesses that I think leading AI labs have to date not deeply invested in nor partnered with other companies to invest in. When I went to the UAE and Saudi Arabia earlier this year, there was one person for a leading AI lab for the entire region. Now, I know that's changing quite rapidly, which is great. But I think the US can be doing more with the government can be doing more with the export promotion instruments to make the US tech the partner of choice and to actually build the rails on which the future tech will run.
Right. So in the AI Diffusion Act, as it's currently written, then you have like these three tiers. You have the friendly tier one, the friendly countries, tier two, the like gray zone, and then China and adversaries in the third tier. Like, how do we decide which ones are friendly and can like be prioritized as partners without any restrictions?
I think that's a really great point. This tiering system was also something the Trump administration did not like about the AI diffusion framework, and is also one of the reasons it now no longer exists. And so I think looking forward, it doesn't make sense to put India on the same tier as Switzerland, entirely different countries, entirely different economies. Um, and so, what I hope going forward, it's more of a uh, tailored partnership approach. So, in the first instance, I'd recommend looking at the most strategic emerging economies, ones that have like the scale to really matter, but also potentially geopolitical swing states or important for broader geopolitical reasons. So India is like a really key partner to the US in tech. There's a new initiative called the Trust Initiative that looks at how the US and India can partner more deeply on trusted technology, in part to also offset Chinese digital Silk Road influence. And so I see like partnering with India as a really key thing going forward. And then like other really significant economies, like when we've talked about the Gulf, but I also think Brazil is a partner where there's so much, there's a lot of reliable clean energy in Brazil, and also interest in data center build out. But they have such strong agricultural priorities as well. That could be a really interesting use case to like, how do you partner with them to see how AI and agriculture could go together? And then I also think there's a role for the closest US partners. So I think of AUKUS, for example, Australia, UK, US. I think it's one of the strongest alliances the US has. And a question around, do you want to do more frontier training with other countries to help offset some of the domestic bottlenecks? So Australia, for example, could potentially be a home to large data centers if the US decided it wanted more trusted partners in this game.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. And the fourth point, we jumped ahead to the fifth point, but going back to the fourth point, stop adversaries from training frontier models through the cloud. So are they allowed to do that at the moment? Can China rent AWS instances and just train their latest models on that, or how does that work at the moment?
I think hypothetically they could. I don't think there's evidence that that is happening. But I think it would be pretty concerning if if, for example, Chinese actors were hiring the UAE data center to run or train frontier models or to elicit strong capabilities from weaker models. Now, at the and so that's why one of the things that's been flagged as part of the security measures that will be worked up for the UAE deal is a know your customer scheme. In the US, we started to do that domestically. There was a draft rule put forward by, I think it was Department of Commerce on know your customer for infrastructure as a service, US products for foreign customers. That stalled when the diffusion rule came in because the diffusion rule kind of replaced that by requiring KYC anyway for external, for data centers overseas using AI, US AI chips at a really large scale. So I think going forward, this is something that we should continue to think about. How can we effectively manage or monitor it? And I think one of the things we talked about was like trying not to incentivize too much domestic build out in China domestically. And so one of the ways you can do that is by allowing cloud compute use up to a certain level, because that removes demand from a domestic market and it isn't at a threshold that is of concern. But then if it moves across that threshold, that's when you might be really concerned and say, oh, actually, let's not let that happen unless it's a known customer and one we can verify is not Chinese or CCP linked.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because this is the most common like counter argument to this diffusion thing that if we stop the flow of ships to China, they will be incentivized to just build their own. So you're suggesting that you can allow through if you like allow them to train or use compute through our cloud providers, then one, we can monitor it and see that it doesn't go through some threshold, and then you have less demand inside China, and then the incentives to build their own or like innovate their own chips, that it goes down. Is that kind of the idea there?
It removes market share from
Yeah,
domestic companies in China, which is good.
yeah,
That being said, I think the CCP is very highly motivated to build their own supply chains, but it
right,
just is really hard to do so. It's really a consolidated supply chain. Like ASML is the only EUV equipment manufacturer in the world that does it for advanced chips. TSMC in Taiwan, as you said, the fab. And so it's just going to take, they're years and years behind, and it will take real concerted effort to catch up. And at the same time, those in the lead are still pushing that frontier forward in compute.
right. So okay, so they are we sure that they are years behind? I don't know. Sometimes I see headlines of like, oh, the new Huawei chip is like super good or something. Is that just headlines or?
Yeah, look, it's really, I think this is something that a lot of people have an opinion on. And the first thing I want to say is that it is always impossible to be completely certain. But there's a number of factors and indicators out there that I think indicate strong support for the estimates that they're about 4 years behind. And one of them is that, and this is Konstantin Pilz's work, is that currently there aren't strong presences of Chinese AI chips in overseas data centers. I think Malaysia
Mm,
just has a couple of thousand, but that's really not very significant, and that's not that big of a deal. It's not running an entire AI data center on them. And even in China, DeepSeek used US chips to train their model. And it seems that leading Chinese firms are using US chips. Other countries are using US chips. No one seems to want Chinese chips. And then the latest Chinese chips that have come out, not all of them, but a large proportion of them uh, got access to TSMC dies, like the internal parts of the chips, through the use of a shell company. So again, this know your customer, like the need for due diligence to see who are you actually dealing with. Um, and so I think there is a misperception that China is like right at the heels of the US on this. My understanding is they're not snapping at the heels. They are coming and they are trying their best, but the US has some lead and so should use it strategically to solidify US advantage rather than just quickly making decisions that might cede longer term power.
right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. But one thing I want to go back to, because I might have misunderstood the current state of the fusion, is the current state, like with these tier systems, has that been removed, or is that still the case?
Uh, that has now been rescinded. So it was
Okay.
released as an interim final rule by the previous administration, which meant that come 16 May, it was due to actually finalize if no action was taken. But the administration took action, the Trump administration took action and rescinded that rule. They
Ah,
said
okay.
that they are working up a new rule and will put it in its place, but I imagine that might take some time.
Right. Right. Generally, like now with the new administration, what is the like broad stroke philosophically cha- differences in how they approach AI regulation compared to the last administration? And then also like do they care that much, or is this just like a few people in the administration? Like, do Trump care, for example, or do Biden care, or is this some of their people under them that care?
Yeah, really good question. Um, so I think the Trump administration's approach to AI is very much focused on accelerating the US lead. They use the term American AI dominance, um, and speeding up innovation and removing hurdles to innovation. And so I think in contrast to the Biden administration's approach, we're seeing less prescriptive regulation and a more reluctance to do any restrictions, and instead thinking about how can you help industry to succeed and win AI. Um, and I think so. Trump has made comments about AI and its national security importance and the importance of beating China in this race towards this transformative technology. Um, we know that JD Vance has like read some pretty in the weeds AI stuff, including AI 2027 by Daniel Kay and co. And so there's engagement in these issues. That being said, like the administration, like the President Trump and Vice President JD Vance, both are managing like a whole range of different priorities as well. So I wouldn't say that AI is a single thing that everyone is focused on, but I would say that it is something that they both think about.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that the JD read AI 2027, or at least there were rumors. Like, did those rumors come from? Like, he made some comment on something that, or did he explicitly say that he read it?
Yes. So in an interview with the New York Times this week,
Yeah.
he said that he had read AI 2027.
Okay. And did he make any comments on like, because that's a very like dystopian read, like the content of that is not like, oh, we should push AI even further because all of these wonderful things will happen. It's basically the outcome is uh, doomer scenarios, right? Did he make any comments on if that changed his view in, because like previously we know on the Paris AI safety summit, he made like a speech that was very concerning from the point of view of AI safety. So do we know if he changed his mind on some of these points after reading that?
I don't know if he changed his mind. I do know he made comments about that he has expressed concerns about the
Right.
possibility of significant negative impacts and things like cybersecurity. Um, and so he's not definitely not ignorant to some of the risks. But I think the general sense pervading Washington, D.C., a strong thing is like we can't see the lead to China. And then another part of that is there's so much opportunity, both security and otherwise, coming from AI that it doesn't make sense to put the brakes on prematurely.
Right. So in general, not just JD and Trump, but like in general, people in government, how well do they understand AI? Do we have like, is there enough experts in AI in the government, or is this a concern that we need to upgrade?
Look, I'm biased because I work in AI. I always want more AI expertise in government. Like I've worked in government for a long time. I see the benefit of having actual subject matter experts in
Yeah,
roles. Um, that being said, I think there's pretty robust talent ecosystem that's increasingly turning to policy, which gives me strong hope for that. Um, I think that the AI Safety Institute is, while it was set up under Biden, I think like it's a real asset that I think the Trump administration is acknowledging, brings strong capabilities and helps the government as a whole understand the understand the capabilities of AI and the changes and trends that are emerging. So yeah, I think there's growing expertise in government, and I think only important to keep bolstering that more.
right. And so you said that you've worked in government and you see the reason for having expertise in your subject field. This is the thing I've been wondering a lot, like maybe not related to AI, but just in general, having people that are experts in the thing. Is that like, as a nerd, as someone who is in AI, of course that's what I want to hear, like, oh sure, more people like me should exist, right? But also I think like if I got into government, probably I would be very useful, very useless, because I don't know how the inner workings of politics works and all of this. So what is what is the best trade-off there? Like, should you have more researchers, experts than what we currently have, or is it actually like maybe a good balance at the moment?
Yeah, good question. I think partnership really matters. So in government, you need to have people with enough expertise to know who to ask and how to engage in these issues. But you can't expect people who are working day to day in government to necessarily be in the weeds on every single deep issue. And that's where consultation, engagement, partnerships with both private, public, and civil society matter. And so I really do see that partnership approach being useful.
Hmm. And if someone, this is zooming out of AI and just talking
Oh
about
yeah.
like government in general, like someone that is an expert in a field, like you take a researcher in some field, a researcher in agriculture or something, and then put them in government. What problems would they have, not being an insider in the political game, or yeah, why is this not a good idea to just put all the PhDs in a certain field as the government?
They're completely different jobs, but expertise in research and being an expert can help you, and you can learn the skills you need for a government job. So in government, a lot of what you do is sort of a lot of stakeholder engagement, synthesizing different viewpoints, identifying risks, both political and national security and social risks, and then communicating really clearly and concisely. You also need to have the ability to think about what's politically palatable and feasible to the policymakers at the top of the chain. There's no point having the best idea in the world if it just does not have support and doesn't like get any airtime. And then I think the last thing is like being able to build coalitions of support for ideas. But all these things are more on the soft skill side of things, or can be learned.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Uh, you also wrote another paper on like the AI. AI shouldn't have like a Chernobyl moment of to stop development. So how can the history of like nuclear energy guide how we do policy related to AI?
Yeah, I think the nuclear policy is often used as an analogy for AI. Like, powerful dual-use technology, you want to spread it for good, but you're worried about spreading it for bad. Um, but I think where I really honed in on in this article was around the risks of allowing for disasters. So thinking about nuclear energy often makes me a bit sad because we had such hope and potential. And if you actually calculate the number of deaths that happen as a result of, um, inhaling the fumes of cooking with coal or not having access to warmth and energy, like there's so many more deaths that occur from an absence of energy than that have occurred because of nuclear disasters. But we're in democratic societies, and you need a social license to do big policy change and to do new innovations. So with AI at the moment, we're kind of at an interesting time. So like I've been looking at recent polling, and some of them are saying that about 60% of US voters believe that the government should have strict rules to make AI safe, even if it slows innovation. So there's already a bit of a momentum saying, oh, hang on, bit concerned about this new technology. How are we feeling about it? And there's no easier way to lose the race to China, as we have with nuclear energy, for example, than the public saying, we do not want this here. This is a democratic nation and we're voting accordingly. And what might trigger that is if a large scale AI disaster happens, whether it's a autonomous cyber attack taking off critical infrastructure, or it's some terrible things that happen to a vulnerable population like children because of AI systems. And my concern is that I want the US government to be poised and ready to identify risks as they emerge, and if and when they materialize, quickly act to ameliorate their impacts or prevent them from having significant impacts. Because if we don't do that, there's a risk that the public is turned off from AI. China can race ahead, and the US is constrained because folk, just like we did with nuclear energy, say, hey, we should not be touching this stuff. We don't want it here. And so that really makes me think, how can you create a government that has the understanding of emerging issues in AI and emerging risks, doesn't necessarily take heavy regulatory action beforehand on hypothetical scenarios because you don't want to stymie growth and innovation, but does have the capacity and agility to act quickly if and when it's needed.
Right. Do you think people will blame AI? So if something like this happened, like for example, some scenarios of I can like think of that could cause this, like you have some like biological virus being developed by AI, but surely there's like one person that uses the ChatGPT uncensored version and they get the recipe, but then they have to go in the lab and actually do it. Do you think AI will be blamed for that? Like, yeah, maybe like, yeah, like with self-driving cars. Maybe if a self-driving car just like crashes into someone, yeah, that okay. I'm taking away my questions because yes, I think AI will. Yes, I think AI will be blamed for this. It actually
Well, yeah, we've had a
actually
really
makes
slow rollout of self-driving cars.
yes,
Um,
yes,
I guess another thing is like it may not be a complete halt of technology, but rather like just a real slowdown or really restrictive regulatory environment that inhibits the ability of AI developers, deployers, to actually be like innovative with AI. And that concerns me. So you talk about this bio side of things. Yeah, I think if something really bad happened in that space, maybe it wouldn't stop AI completely, but you'd get a lot more checks and balances in this. Like you'd have a lot more stringent regulations called for as a result.
Right. So so what's the like process of um, the public impacting AI research? So is that the public gets angry, policymakers needs to like say do as the public wants, and then they put regulations to slow down the AI labs, or like in what way? How does the public decide what Sam Altman does, basically?
I think that's a pretty, like, that's rough, but
Yeah.
reasonably correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And the current public perception, you said that 60% of people think that government should have some kind of tool to slow down AI research if it needs to. If was that correct?
60% believe that the government should have strict rules in place to make sure that AI is safe and fair.
Right. Okay, 60%. Um, so are there other like so that's one aspect of the public's perception. Are there other like stats here that are like interesting in what the public currently thinks? And also one thing, like how are do people care? Like if what were the options here? Were there like yes or no? Was it yes, no, I don't care? Like how much of the public actually care about this?
Yeah, I think it really varies. And I think even when people are concerned, it's not a
Priority.
top of draw issue for people. And that is what could change if something felt dramatic, existential, or hurt people that people knew. But at the moment, people, I think, generally are pretty concerned at the pace of change, both from like a personal perspective of like, oh wow, the world is changing fast, education's changing, everyone's using these things now. I don't know how they really work. But through to the whole, well, this could be quite risky. But I don't think many people are focused on it compared to things like cost of living and other political issues.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe the two places that people actually care is maybe SF primarily, and then DC. So you live in DC right now.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So how do you think like these two are bubbles, right? I think rest of the country or world maybe don't care about AI at all. But like I live in the SF bubble. Like here, everyone is like AGI is coming, or my AI startup is going to use AI and change the world. What is the perception in DC? What's the AI bubble in DC? Is there like do people care? Is there a difference in what people think when they think about AI in DC compared to SF?
Yeah, I do notice a bit of a juxtaposition between when I go to SF, folk are talking about existential questions of what it means to be like human and what it means to be intelligent, but also potentially catastrophic risks or like AI becoming incredibly more capable in very short timelines. In Washington, D.C., I think the bubble can be a bit more focused on US vis-a-vis China, like who's ahead, how do we beat China, how do we make sure that the US has the lead. Um, but there seems to be like a growing acceptance of the use of the term AGI now, even though that's a very varied term. Um, but it is less, everyone has sort of longer timelines or are less focused on this as a really near-term issue, I think,
Mm,
with
okay,
notable exceptions, of course.
right, right, makes sense. So, what should generally like what should the government's role be in preventing? Because we talk about the government's role in preventing like China from taking over the lead and stuff. But like, what should the government's role be in preventing some bad thing like this happening? Like how this Chernobyl moment for AI. That's more domestic. Like we shouldn't allow people inside the U.S. use AI for bad things. How can we regulate in that way?
Yeah, I think with this administration, I don't think there's any strong appetite for preemptive regulation at this time. I think instead the role of government could be to um, have strong capability to understand what's happening in the AI space and trends, be a strong interconnector between AI labs, the national security community, and industry to look at how are these things being deployed, what capabilities are emerging. And then I think there's also a role to increase agility and responsiveness. So when I think about agility, it's like already know what levers you have in place or what authorities you have to act quickly if certain risks seem likely, and what conditions need to be in place to make that happen. And then responsiveness, if something bad does happen, does the US have like the muscle memory in place, the connections with private sector, civil sector to take action quickly to stop widespread harm happening from something? And I think that latter one is really important. I once worked in sort of more of a crisis area of government, and there was a time someone called me with information that I was like, oh, whoa, that is like a really big deal. And I had no idea who to call. And like, it just, the systems weren't in place because it was such a niche topic to take
Interesting.
action. And so I think with AI, there's a whole set of new stakeholders in like civil society, private sector, government, who are just learning how to talk to each other. And I think actually normalizing these relations, having stronger interconnectivity is important to take action if and when something arises.
Right. Can you just give like one example of two actors that need better communication in that way? Yeah, to paint a
Yeah, so
picture
I
of
think,
how this looks.
yeah, I think critical infrastructure owners and operators play a critical role in our society. Like, um, they have some pretty good networks with the critical, what is it, the CISA, the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency in government. But when we're thinking about what happens if a model acts in unanticipated ways and in semi-autonomous ways that then completely undermine cybersecurity or spreads something that's malicious and could impact or shut down or ransomware critical infrastructure, uh, I think the labs need to be at the table for those conversations, or the compute providers who are deploying or hosting that model. And at the moment, I don't think we've done proper, I think there's still work to do on understanding which scenarios might arise and who do you need to have talking to each other and who holds which levers in response.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, yeah, because like if you are in you maybe you're a manager at some critical infrastructure thing, something bad happens because of AI. Probably you don't have the phone number of someone that that knows AI or like is in a position to do something about it. That's an interesting setup. So for my last question, now let's assume that it's 2035, so 10 years from now, and AI utopia is here, and we have achieved AGI. No human needs to work. We have UBI. Everything is perfect. And then you look back from this point at the past 10 years, so from now until then. And what is the thing that you look back on that you are the most proud of that you did during these 10 years?
Wow. Maybe I've been primed from this conversation, but I think ensuring that it's a democratic country that leads the transition and the design of these models. So I'd be really proud to have tried to be a part of strengthening the likeliness of that future.
That's a wonderful way to end it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Thanks so much, Lucas. It was great speaking with you.